coalition. Though we're not here in any official capacity to represent the voice of the coalition, the perspective of the coalition, I think, will be present in some way, shape, or form. So just to try to make that distinction. And we've got a bit of a little outline to just guide us as we talk through. And I think we're going to try to make it a little bit more conversational across Rico and I, and hoping just to kind of touch on three key pieces. So I think one is that is sort of a check-in on like what's up post issue 24, right? Knowing that both of our organizations and our coalition of many organizations put a lot of time and energy and resources into that campaign and did not get the result that we wanted. Just a quick, conversation about what that means for not only the groups that were behind it, but for the city as a whole, and what it means looking forward. That's sort of one. I think because the city council right now is working pretty hard to pass this connected communities package that is a proposed zoning reform package that we, to the extent that does or doesn't impact affordable housing, and some of the thoughts and feelings from a housing justice perspective on that. I want to touch on that. And then I think we also it's always important, I think, in these conversations, to be like, hey, if we had it our way, what would the city be doing right now? Because otherwise it's hard. It's hard so much with policy stuff. When you're trying to advocate for justice, it can be difficult. A lot of it is reactionary. You're trying to think about what feels like doable in this moment, and what and I think it is valuable to take a step back and say, there are things that should be done. They would be done. So I want to save a little space at the end for that.
Sounds good.
Rico, do you want to introduce yourself in any deeper way?
Yeah, so I'm Rico Blackman. I am Director of Community Organizing at the Greater Cincinnati Homeless Coalition. And to Jen's point, me and Jen and the Coalition for Cincinnati for Action of Housing Now worked together very closely over the last year to get issue 24 on the ballot, and then to be able to vote for it back in November. My job at the coalition is really organizing folks within apartment buildings, within neighborhoods, and within communities. So that can look like tenant organizing, that can look like organizing to save a space or save an apartment building. That can also just look like organizing folks to fight for more affordable housing here in Cincinnati. And that's what issue 24 brought us to. So I'm just happy to be here. I'm happy to have this discussion with Jen, because Jen and Peasley, they do phenomenal work. And I've always been just in admiration of all the stuff y'all done.
Thanks, Rico.
Yeah.
Just to share a compliment back at you. I'm not sure I would want to live in a Cincinnati that didn't have the Homeless Coalition, to be frank. So I think what Homeless Coalition does, what Rico has done, just hitting the pavement on the organizing front, is impossible to fully value or to name the value of that. It's really immense. So, all right, let's talk about. Oh man, have you recovered from in the wake of issue 24? Yeah, I would say it's tough.
It was tough.
Yeah.
It was nonstop. It was my first time being a part of any campaign in like a major way. Like, I've been in campaigns kind of like as just like a canvasser, door knocker, or like putting together materials for, to send out to people, but never in this capacity have I ever been in a campaign. And so it was a stressor on my life for months. Because I would wake up thinking about issue 24 and thinking about the consequences if it didn't go through. Thinking about how this is our only opportunity to really make a difference in affordable housing here in Cincinnati. And, thinking about how people's lives are at stake. Because I think it's more than just a charter amendment. It's more than just a movement. People's lives are at stake here when we're talking about housing, because housing is the basis for everything to evolve around, whether it's food, whether it's healthcare, education. connected communities, healthy communities, and whatever you want to say, housing is the baseline for everything. So I am recovered now, but it took about a couple of months after issue 24 in November. What about yourself?
Yeah, I'm somewhere in a similar place. I want to just review in case there's anyone on the call or folks who like what the heck was issue 24. It probably makes sense for us to name that. So in November, since I had the opportunity to vote on a ballot initiative that would have that was a proposed charter amendment that would have created the opportunity to raise our income tax, Cincinnati's earned income tax, 0.1%, to take it back to the level that Cincinnati paid for decades prior to that, and to take that difference and put it directly into affordable housing, and most specifically into the affordable housing that is affordable at the price points that the data show are desperately needed in Cincinnati, like where Cincinnati's need is. And partly, I mean, there are many things that brought that on. There was a ballot initiative a couple of years prior. But one of the other things that spurred that was extra oomph to kind of secure issue 24 was the realization that the money, the public money, even what we thought and had been told as the public in Cincinnati that was being dedicated to our affordable housing trust fund in the city that was established in 2018 was not actually going into that affordable housing trust fund, right? It was being scattered and diverted into an array of other accounts, and that those later got lumped together in what the city called the fund of funds, or is now the leverage fund, and that the diversion of that money, with that came the loss of the income targets that would have ensured that that money went to where the need where the need is greatest, where the need is staggering.
And where is the need at?
Yeah,
for a good question for everybody, where is the need?
That's a good question, Rico. Overwhelmingly, the need is at or below what we would call 30% of the Cincinnati area median income. That's the metro area, so it includes I don't know, 15 counties or so. And overwhelmingly, it's under that 30% level. What remains outside of that is almost exclusively under 50% AMI, and it is very small compared to the under 30% AMI level. So this is jargony. It's difficult. One central challenge of talking about affordable housing policy is that there's like the core issue is this really fundamental mismatch in the money that people have and the money that the market demands of housing. But the terms are wonky. It's difficult to translate. We put a lot of time and energy into translating those area median income terms into monthly dollar amounts attached to bedroom size that made sense to folks, or that were more relevant to people's everyday experience.
The easiest way, in my opinion, to look at it is to say our area median income, which is our AMI, is around $100,000. So, 50% of that is $50,000. And where most people are making money at is around 30% AMI, which is about 30,000 below. So that's how I kind of look at it. And it's really hard to get into that conversation because some people will say, well, AMI percentages, is that really accurate? Because most folks here in Cincinnati do not make $100,000. Most folks here in Cincinnati make below $50,000. So where's the need at? The need is not at this 80% AMI, $80,000 and up. It's below that and way below $30,000 even, because people in Cincinnati, especially Black folks, make on average $28,000, under a single family household. So it really is difficult. But once you understand that when you think about AMI percentages below 40, 30%, that is where the need is at. And that's where we need to put funding and money into. So this leverage fund, which you call it the Cincinnati Development Fund, is where the money's going, right? And it is helping to build affordable housing developments here in Cincinnati. But again, where is the restrictions at? restrictions are not in that lower 30 to 60% AMI, it goes up to 80%, right? So we need our Affordable Housing Trust Fund 439 to be funded and to have funding for developers to be able to use that for actual affordable housing.
Yeah, tricky to start with the wonky stuff, but it is really central to the question of like what's possible with policy and what needs to be done with policy. So I would say this: the Cincinnati Action for Housing Now is the large coalition that created that ballot initiative and launched it and supported it throughout.
Yeah.
That coalition is still active.
Yes.
We've done a lot of assessing what we learned from the initiative and its failure to pass. I do think some of the difficult realities of Cincinnati's political landscape became quite clear to those of us who care about housing justice, even if some of them we kind of already knew. I think we know in a bigger, deeper way now.
Yes.
And I think one thing that became clear is like with the ballot initiative and organizing for the ballot initiative in a really tight timeline, what we did not have time to do or resources to do was to really engage folks who are not active registered voters who are deeply on board with what we were proposing and who are primarily impacted by the lack of affordable housing and the housing crisis. So I think it's become clear to us that it's always the answer is always organized, right? When you lose a vote, it's always organized.
Always organized.
But I think that mismatch or that gap, it was pretty stark and is and issues for housing advocates a real challenge to do a better job organizing and engaging folks. So I want to just at least acknowledge that since issue 24 passed and that coalition has remained active, the main policy goal that remains the priority for that coalition is funding the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And by that, I mean Fund 439, which is the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund, because those targets are so important to make sure that cash, right? Like we have other opportunities and other things to leverage further up that income spectrum to generate affordable housing, but the cash has to be reserved for where we need it most. It is bad policy to do otherwise. So that remains the central goal, but we know that in order to get there, there's a lot we've got to do. So Rika, I want to just make sure, because I think the most important thing here, especially given your expertise and the tremendous amount of work you've been doing around organizing people power, that you can speak at length about what you and many others are doing to organize tenants and people most directly in sort of smaller battles around housing.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. Definitely, as an organizer myself, it all comes back down to organizing. And the one instance I will say we really did not take a full advantage of, to Jen's point, is organizing people and building enough people power to win this, to get this to pass, because we had all the odds stacked up against us, right? We had the Democratic Party saying they did not want to see this happen. We had a bunch of different coalitions outside of, our coalition saying they didn't want this to happen. But we had people saying that we wanted it to happen. And the problem that I saw was that when I was going to buildings and telling people about it, they were showing me 3, 4, 5, sometimes even 6 different cards sent to them that challenged everything we were saying and were complete lies about issue 24. So one, I remember one very specific card said that they will make way for outside developers to come in and develop housing here in Cincinnati. And we already have outside developers here in Cincinnati developing housing. So if you're going to say that, then you also got to speak to the truth here. That's already happening, and that's not even the purpose of this. The purpose is to have money going towards a trust fund for affordable housing developers like Odorine Community Housing to be able to build more housing here in Cincinnati that's truly affordable. So, we did our best with the amount of time we had, and we didn't have a lot of time. We got the signatures completed. I think 12,000 signatures collected by July, right? That was enough to get this on the ballot because we needed about, I think, 5,000, roughly 5,000, 6,000 signatures to get on the ballot. And we did that with people going out the doors, people going to community events, people just showing up on the sidewalks, asking people if they wanted affordable housing here in Cincinnati. And people were signing. So we were easily able to get those signatures. The problem is, once we did, we learned that it would be on a ballot in August. So we had August, September, October, and November, literally only 4 months, less than 4 months to really make a difference. Um, and we spent a lot of time with canvassers, going to doors, again, getting people to pledge their vote, going to community events, getting people to pledge their vote. But when you had that opposition constantly throwing negative information, lies, throwing out things that are not true, then that's where people start to really question the validity, I can't even say it,
Validity.
the validity of this actual issue. So we did a lot, and I would say I'm really proud of what we've done. Though we got 25,000 people to vote for this. 25,000 people to vote for this, and 25,000 people saying that we want more money going towards affordable housing because of the work that we were able to do, because of the work of the churches that organized to help us out. Several Black churches stepped in and stepped up to say we want affordable housing. The NAACP did, the coalition of different organizations all came together to say they wanted affordable housing. And so while we did not win, while it felt like it was a loss, it also felt like a victory because we were able to say we got people to vote for this and we can build on this for the next step. And I know we're going to get into that a little bit later, but that's where the next step comes in is building upon on what we learned from issue 24.
Yeah, that's well put. That's well put. Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to add about any of that?
Yeah. So I will add just see some comments in there, and we're going to get to the comments eventually. Tenant organizing is a big thing of what I do. Tenant organizing, in a sense, is organizing people power within apartment buildings, within homes, within neighborhoods. And so, for instance, Williamsburg, I know y'all know about Williamsburg and what happened up there, what's still happening up there. Back in 2022, we had a resident reach out to us and say that they were without water for 4 days. Um, I was asking questions around that, like how long has water been out? Have you called everybody? What actions have you taken to get the water back on? And they exhausted everything. I mean, they made all the necessary phone calls. They reached out to the necessary council members and to the necessary departments in our, in our government, but nothing was changing. Nothing. And they were at a loss because they were like, either just get fixed or we got to move out. And if we got to move out, we're not going to find something affordable. We're not going to find something that is, you know, affordable to our living situation. So we went up there. I went up to this resident unit, went to her home. We sat down, we chatted for about 2 hours. She told me her life story. She told me how long she'd been living there, all the issues she's dealt with. And turns out this water thing was just the icing on the cake, right? Maintenance issues, sewage issues. I mean, we're talking about units not being maintained in years. We're talking about people being evicted because of falsification, eviction filings. And so I'm like, all right, well, first things first, what can we do to get this issue out to people? And well, they told me that there's a group of residents already who already have been dealing with these issues and want to do something about it. I said, okay, let's get them into a room. Let's see if we can gather them up and figure out what common demands we want to have, what common issues we are going through that we want to have in a list of demands to sending out to people saying we want these things being fixed or we want these things to be changed now. So I think within 2 weeks, we had our first meeting at Hartwell Community Center. It was a packed house. I want to say about 75 people showed up. Really, really impactful to see that many people show up in just a matter of 2 weeks. No, no, not even a matter of 2 weeks, a week actually. We met on Friday, and then the next Friday we had the meeting. People stood up saying we want this. People stood up saying this is unacceptable. People stood up saying that if something doesn't change, I'm going to go to legal action. You know, people were furious at this meeting, and as an organizer, you want that fury, you want that passion, you want that emotion, but you also want to be able to gather that and put it into a bottle, right? And be able to say, all right, what's our next step? Because we can keep screaming, we can keep talking, but we got to be able to figure out how to do something about it. And so the group wound up saying that we wanted to create a list of demands, create a letter, and send it out to the government, send it to the Williamsburg management and Williamsburg owners. And that's what we did. Fast forward a whole year later, now the ownership is in transfership. So they will have new owners by the end of next year because of the work that the residents did and the work that the residents were able to do in a short time span. And also, I want to say, really, the biggest thing that really helped them was the numbers of people, the collective, the number of reports that were going to the city health department, to the city building department, going out to the local 12 news, to WCPO, to Fox. Like people were, I think at one point there was more than 200 reports to the city's health department. 200 different reports from people. That's the city had no choice but to step in at that point. And I will say it was kind of too late for a lot of people. A lot of people did get evicted. A lot of people did lose their homes and are dealing with mold issues, are dealing with, asthma, allergies, really bad health elements. But we were able to say enough is enough. And that's that people power we need in order for us to move forward in any work that we do. Is gathering people in neighborhoods, in communities, in apartment complexes, home ownership associations, right? As much as we don't like them, sometimes we do need organizations to step up and say we don't want this to happen, or we do want this to happen. So that's what I've been doing. Fun stuff. It's a lot, but it's fun stuff and really important stuff to get us to where we need to be.
Yeah, and I would say, at least I've not been around for terribly long, about a decade, right? But most of the tenant organizing I've seen around the city happens at the hands of the Homeless Coalition that does that miraculously with very little in the way of resources, right? And these things are connected, right? They're the same issue, right? The affordable housing we do have at the price points that we desperately need down there generally is poor quality because of disinvestment, because of landlords not maintaining properties, right? So the idea of putting our cash, our public dollars, our investment in affordable housing to decent quality housing that can meet those income needs, like that, it is they're the same.
Yes.
They're the same, right? They're the same issue that is fundamentally affecting people. So I think the goal too is that, or is to think about like what could the work look like if an organization like the Homeless Coalition in that tenant organizing work had broader support, had more people engaged, had more people showing up when neighbors down the street are facing conditions like this, are advocating, are demanding to be heard. I think we have, new heights to reach if we organize broader coalitions around some of that work.
Yes, and think about like the work that Peasley has done or Over the Rhine Community Housing. I mean, I give it an example. The most basic help they've given us is allowing me to use their vans to drive people to a meeting, to drive people to city council, to drive people to different locations where we're trying to build people power, right? So just a small, just that small action that Over the Rhine Community Housing did for us to allow that to happen is impactful because people cannot drive. right? People have transportation issues, and people cannot get to places because of barriers. And so if you can eliminate some of those barriers, whether it's transportation, income, whatever else, then you can make people power and organizing easier. Um, that's the type of help that we'll be asking for. It's like just that basic, like, hey, we see y'all having a meeting. Can we help out with lunch? Or can we help out with dinner? Can we provide snacks? Can we provide tables, chairs? Or can we go to our own communities and organize, right? I think about Peasley and Peasley allowing us to use the basement. They allowed us to use the basement as kind of our home for Cincinnati Action for Housing now, to be able to have meetings and have different actions and different events. And it was really helpful for us because while we love the Homeless Coalition and we have the space, we just don't have the parking. We don't have the parking. So people like will have to figure out parking across the neighborhood. And this could be a really challenge. I got 8 parking tickets on me right now. So yeah, hey, I'm calling out the city on that. But I got 8 parking tickets because all the parking is gone in Over Rhine. But having Peasley as the place for us to have meetings and have events and have actions is really helpful. So any bit of help for us to be able to organize and for people to organize with us can be is priceless, to say the least.
Thanks, Rico.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where do we
please.
go from here would be the question I would pose to you now. We've got the city still not really getting on the ball in terms of policy with regard to affordable housing. What are our next steps? Like the city has this major zoning change that they're proposing. What do we do to reform that?
Yeah, so I think we can shift to talk about some of the zoning proposals. I do think one thing that's really important when we think about housing justice and policy is to be clear-eyed about what are the policies that make the most difference, right? Like there's a gajillion tools you could potentially use that might impact housing or housing affordability in some way, but they're not all made equal, right? And the good thing, I suppose, about Cincinnati being pretty behind the 8 ball on affordable housing policy and having next to nothing in the way of policy and legislation that advances affordable housing is that like there's a huge body of knowledge nationally over like what makes the most difference, what works best, right? What's the most worth our time. So I do think it's always important to take a step back and do that. So before I want to shift to talk about zoning, but I do think it's really important to say on a local level, at the city level, there is nothing that a city can do to advance affordable housing more effectively and more significantly than a well-funded and well-targeted local housing trust fund, right? It's the thing that would make the biggest difference. So we can talk about other things, they are important, but it is really, really important to center that because that is what we're up against, right? Like we need the federal government to be putting more resources to affordable housing. There's always that national federal advocacy we can and should be doing. But in the meantime, what can the city be doing? There is nothing that is more important than finding public money and targeting it smartly at where our specific local city need is. And I would argue it's that second piece that is not happening adequately in our city, and it's why we've been fighting that fight.
Yes.
And I think the reality of that, the reason behind that is that the private market does not do what we want it to do. It does not invest it does not build equitable communities, and it does not know how to. So we can chase private money and we can seek ways to leverage resources in the private sector to make them work for affordable housing, but that will never render the kind of outcomes that putting our public resources democratically towards the thing that the market will not do, right? That is the single most important thing we can do. So I do want to say that loud and clear when we talk about policy.
Yes.
That said, we can chew gum and walk, right? Right? You can do more than one thing.
You sure can.
So so I think there's a zoning reform being talked about at the city. It's been talked about for some time. I want to acknowledge that part of my vantage point, looking at what's what's kind of moving at the city comes a bit out of like Peasley's time and energy that we've taken to look at how things like zoning and other public benefits that can be given to developers of the private market can be leveraged for public gain, specifically for affordable housing, but not limited to. So for those who are familiar with Peasley's equitable development rubric project that we started years ago, it was specifically looking at this thing, right? Like, hey, we live in a city that is offering public gains and public benefits to private developers. Where and how can we be utilizing those to maximize the public gain that we get, right? So I would say that's the fundamental question of that tool that we made. That tool, if you want to look at like how it lines up with policy nationwide, I would say the rubric, Peasley's rubric, and the framework that we built around it was sort of an ambitious attempt to combine what is like a community benefits agreement process and an inclusionary housing type policy, and almost to bake them together. When I say ambitious, I mean it. I think we also were trying and are with that project trying to solve some really fundamental challenges with things like community engagement that are just problems in our city that need solving. So it was and is an ambitious tool that I think it has a lot of value. But yeah, did you want to say?
Oh, I was just going to ask you,
Yeah.
like, you know, why is having that important? You know, because before the rubric or any mention of a rubric, developments would go to neighborhood councils, right? And they would basically ask for approval or ask for permission to develop or build whatever they want to build. So I was just going to ask you, you know, what's the importance of having such a thing for communities to be able to use?
Yeah, I think it's a major investment in like public knowledge and awareness and collective power to look at where and when we do have a say or something to leverage to ask for more. It is really important that we're conscious collectively of like that exists and that we use it wisely.
Yes, yes.
And I think, you know, the rubric came largely out of the experience of our folks here in Over the Rhine, who had for years seen a huge uptick in development projects and the sort of positioning of the city be one way to facilitate that private development happening, but never seeing a shift to account for the way that the market has changed, right? So it's like, oh, we need to. Go ahead.
Keep going. We do have some comments in the chat.
Great. Oh, okay. Sure.
You got a question?
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
see this one here.
My name is Freeman McNeil, and I'm listening to y'all, and I understand exactly what y'all are saying. But this is where, as y'all keep emphasizing, the problem lies. Cincinnati, in the beginning, when they wrote this thing for the affordable housing, included low-income housing, affordable housing. That was written into this policy. Shortly after the implementation of it, the policy was changed to eliminate low-income affordable housing. Just like y'all keep referencing that the money is not going to where it's supposed to be because only the feds are recognizing low-income affordable housing. The city does not recognize low-income affordable housing. So instead of talking around it, it's time to be extremely direct and force the city to live up to that agreement and do low-income affordable housing.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment, and I think
I do.
I think what you're saying is central to the ballot initiative that we've made, right? It's except that it's defined, right? It's slippery, right? We can use the term affordable, What the heck does it mean? You can use the word low income, and what the heck does it mean, right? Because everything exists on a spectrum. So I think trying to be really intentional about how we analyze what we already know, right? And how we're smart about how we put it into policy, and how we target those things, right? So I think oftentimes city officials will say, well, like, oh, well, the fund of funds can fund the stuff down there. There's nothing that prevents it from funding the 30, 50, 60% AMI units, right? Which is low income affordable housing, to your point, right? Which is true,
Yeah.
right? It's just that when we don't restrict it there, it ends up overwhelmingly being spent above those levels because it's easier. You can make more units that way. You can, if you're getting pressure, if you're a developer in a pretty hot part of the Cincinnati market and you're getting pressure to include affordable, and it would be nice to get cash to do that, you can use that cash to make the stuff that's much easier to make instead of getting cash to do the stuff that's much harder to make. Even if the cash is enough to offset up here, or you know what I mean? Like the restrictions are the thing that make an increase in those units being generated. Otherwise, what we get are the same handful of amazing affordable housing developers in our city who do this stuff like Over the Right Community Housing, right? Who make a way out of no way, who make the numbers work when the numbers do not work, right? Right, like those projects will get can and will get funding from the fund of funds. It's important, but like the key is to foster more of that being done, additional developers doing it, because we can't, groups like OTRCH can't bear the burden alone of creating the affordable housing we need. Like we literally can't, and also shouldn't, right? Like we need more. We need, and if we have cash to help with it, then we have to restrict that cash to where it can spur additional developers to do the stuff at the bottom that most developers are just not even not even willing to look at or touch. So I think,
Questions in the chat.
Sure. Would you like, please, would you like to read them to us? I'm happy to.
If they can hear me. I think the bigger problem is that corporate, and this is from MS, Maggie Stevens. I think the bigger problem is that corporate interests and Democratic Party leadership of the city could spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to advertise voting against it. We either need investigative journalists to start telling the stories of how the shadow leadership of the city decided Affordable Housing Trust Fund would not get money. Do you want to comment?
I would say, yeah, for sure.
Agree.
Agree on that. I mean, it's really to your point. That goes back to your point. The city has to make it.
It was Maggie Shree.
Oh, got you. The city has to make it a priority, a focus. They have to make it a mandatory, essentially, to say we need low income housing and we need it all across the city in every neighborhood, right? Not just in our neighborhoods, that already have it, and those neighborhoods that can use more of it, right? But in neighborhoods that like Evanston, Walnut Hills, Avondale, Bond Hill, all these different apartments, all these different communities, they need affordable housing. They need low income housing. People are struggling, people are suffering, and people will continue to die if we don't do something about it. Last year, we had more than 180 people die because of homelessness. Last year, which was a 16% increase from the year before. So every single year is going to keep growing and keep growing and keep growing unless we do something about it now. Not tomorrow, not next year, now. So I agree with that. And you're absolutely right. We need to hold them accountable, because if we don't, we're just not going to get it.
In corporate Cincinnati put out in the future commissions report, they want to use the
right
in tax. I think they knew that.
That's why the city was opposed.
That's right.
Yeah, I think they had different plans
Well,
for
that's
that.
the thing.
That's right.
That we had a forum with the mayor 2 years ago, I guess, and that was a question to him is, why don't we just restore the 0.3%? And he got very wishy-washy about it, and it was because they had already earmarked it. And that's what the commission was intended to do, was to ratify it, to regularize it for the city and give them coverage on it.
I'm also having-
Actually more-
I'm having a weird memory that I might have misspoke about the tax increase at the beginning of the, it was 0.3. I just want to make sure I didn't misspeak on that, which I know I was
Yeah.
looking at the Futures Commission report before this. I may have said 0.1 and I didn't mean 0.1. Just
Oh,
for
yeah,
the record,
yeah.
for the record.
Yeah.
It was 0.3.
Here's another comment by Maggie Street. I'll add to what I've already proposed we look at. I'm not a big fan of Saul Alinsky's methods for community organizing. But since moving back here in 2022, I'm pretty convinced that we need to focus on the common enemy. Are Cincinnatians too nice to name the enemy?
No.
Yeah, interesting question. I don't know that my expertise speaks to that one. If I have any, yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think just,
Jen,
please.
I'll make two things. One, the Cincinnati Futures are the connected communities.
Yeah.
It seems to me the best that's being offered out of that is a form of trickle-down housing, which I don't think has ever succeeded.
That's right.
And the second thing is that by making density increases right, they've abandoned the tool that allows for asking developers to provide units. And I think the rubric was right. I think that one of the more effective solutions would be if all developments that receive any kind of city assistance, whether it was zoning or dollars for infrastructure, and require varying requirements to put in units that were below market. And I think that that's one way we could have added things faster. The second thing, and I'd like to comment on this, I honestly don't think that we can solve the city's problem inside the city limits. The LISC study that a lot of us participated in, like 5 years ago now, I think,
Yes.
had totals of 40,000 countywide, 28,000 of that was in the city. So the city had more than double the number of needed units as the rest of the county, and yet the city is now, what, a third of the county's population? So I guess the question I come down to is, has the county been involved in any affordable housing funding of any significance?
Let me just let you know, you have an audience of 12 people, but they are hearing the comments.
okay.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah. There's so much you said in there and all of it's good. I couldn't agree with you more on the first couple points that I want to pivot to. To your question about the county, I want to say that I have less knowledge to be able to answer that quite well. I do know with the American Rescue Plan money, the way that some of that federal money came via counties or via cities, there's money that's been committed to affordable housing on both levels, at least from that. My understanding is that is what is typically lumped together in the figures that are offered over what's in the leverage fund or what's in the fund of funds. But that those, because the counties can provide housing countywide, they're different pots, they're different funds in the fund of funds, if you will, right? And I do think, I think that point is well taken. It's really important. I think one thing that frustrates me when we hear people talk about housing policy is that when you press on a thing like, oh, we need to do this, often it's like, well, there's no one tool that fixes it all, which of course that's true. There's no one tool that fixes it all, but often then the response of our elected officials is to make every tool essentially worthless, right? That we're not maximizing the control and the ability we do have to use the tools that we have to the best of our ability, right? So it's right. We need other tools. We need stuff from the county. We need private money. And doing one thing well does not preclude those other tools from being pursued, right? And to be included. We need a holistic approach. We need all those things to work. But if our if our knowledge that that's the case gets us off the hook of like from passing a thing that actually makes significant difference, then like we can be guaranteed that nothing of value is going to come from a bunch of tools that we've watered down to be meaningless, right? Like
Yep.
you have to make each tool, you only have so many tools in the toolbox. So I think to Ed's point too, on the thing, just on a personal level, the thing I would fixate on the most when it comes to connected communities is exactly what Ed said, is that we offer this thing now with none of the strings attached that many cities, a myriad of cities across our country have learned that can be generated and leveraged for affordable housing, even if it's in small percentages, even if it comes in bits and pieces, it adds up, right? We give that away and we cough up the opportunity to use one critical tool in the toolbox, right? Like it's another lost opportunity. And it's not just a small one, right? It's like a thing. So I want to be clear, right, that inclusionary housing is sort of the umbrella term for the policies nationwide that have been passed to say when a public entity, when a jurisdiction, municipality offers a benefit, a public benefit to private developers, that there are strings attached that where that is leveraged to create by way of a requirement of a proportion of the units in that development to be made affordable. There's a wide spectrum of good and bad inclusionary housing policies, right? There are many that are completely worthless because they're poorly designed. And there are many that are very, very valuable because they're well designed, right? And I think one thing that Peaslee has advocated for in recent years, in part because of our work on the rubric and because of all the research we did to look at how this stuff is done elsewhere, is that like we desperately need an inclusionary housing policy. And I want to be clear on the fact that Cincinnati still, it's an economy, it's a development market that, you know, it's not the same as every other city. It's not uniform across the city by any means, right? We know that there are a handful of really hot markets and that the other neighborhoods essentially remain left behind by private development. That said, other cities like ours have found ways to attach those requirements to set them so that they do generate units where the market is hot, where development is happening, right? And I think that's really, really important to emphasize. So one thing that's interesting about this moment where the city is advocating for the zoning changes is it's like they cannot say the word Minneapolis enough times. Everybody wants to talk about Minneapolis and eliminating single family zoning and Minneapolis. And what gets completely left out of the equation is that Minneapolis has a very good inclusionary housing policy. And is it as good as it could possibly be? Probably not. I would like to see it a little stronger, but it's good and it's generating units.
And it took years after.
That's right.
Took years after they originally had zoning changes.
Kansas City had the same thing.
And what we know on a national level is instead of wasting those years, it is best to do them at the same time.
Yes.
Like when you give away the thing that can make developers whole on the requirement, when you give it away up front, the market adjusts, right? Landowners ask more for their land, right? Like that benefit quickly evaporates. And then you're trying to attach, if you want to then say like, oh, maybe down the line we'll attach affordable. It doesn't work that way, right? Like we're talking about making a public change that is privately profitable. It only makes sense to do that. Like inclusionary housing is one of the only tools that allows for something called like value capture, right? It means the city can make decisions that make development more profitable. And it makes sense